Have you wondered what financial advisors actually think about finances? This is your sneak peek at the conversations within Financial Design Studio. Michelle Smollenberger, the CEO here, will be your host as you go behind the designs.
All right, welcome to Behind the Designs. Today's episode is the third of 4 interviews of our core leadership team here at Financial Design Studio. We want to introduce ourselves to you as the person behind the financial professional. So today we are interviewing our Chief Investment Officer, Rob Stoll. Welcome, Rob.
Hello. Great to be back.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear your answers to some of these questions and just to get to know you a little bit more and let everybody else know you a little bit more.
Yeah. It's, human nature is we always like to talk about ourselves, but it's being invited on the podcast and it's like, we're only going to talk about you and your life. And it's like, okay. But I'm here because, it is, I think for, clients, prospective clients, and just anybody out there, just kind of knowing the person behind who's doing your work is really, really important. And, you don't really get that a lot in professional relationships or that opportunity. So I think this is great that we're doing this.
Yeah, we're always asking questions of clients because we want to know. We want to hear, what are you doing this summer? What trip did you just go on? And it's hard then, we want to share what we're doing too and who we are and, what gets us excited. All right. Well, also this episode is really valuable as you learn more from Rob, who chooses, the investments for clients and how his life experiences and professional experiences have, shape how this happens today. It was interesting. I was at a professional networking event maybe a month ago, and I learned some really good questions to ask others, really to go deep, to learn more, and also ask how to ask these questions so that people share as much as you want to hear. So, these are things you might even hear, these questions, and these are great questions you could ask of anybody that you really want to know more about. So we offered this book as a giveaway in our most recent quarterly newsletter, so grab that in the show notes if you're interested. But let's dive right in. We know a little bit about your story, Rob, but we want to know more of what drives you. Kind of what 2 or 3 things shape how you think professionally, about finances and investing. So we'll review a couple of main questions, and I look forward to hearing these answers as well. So I guess let's just dive right in, kind of really big picture, personally, when you look back over your life, what would you say are maybe, 2 or 3 life events or people, just what 2 or 3 things have kind of shaped who you are today?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I always like to joke that my life was pretty much set by the time I turned 18 in terms of what I was going to do, who I am and all that. So, product of a good upbringing and my parents in particular, I think really influenced me a lot in terms of who I am today and in different ways. So, I look at my dad, very hard worker, middle class, he turned 18 and really got to work, married my mom. We were a family of 5 in pretty short order. And, he really instilled in me the value of hard work. If you want something, you have to work for it, go after it. And also just the spirit of kind of serving others as well. So that wasn't really something he had a lot of time to do when I was growing up. But as we all grew up, he really got involved in local politics, and he was on the volunteer fire department, things like that. So, a lot of that really just stuck with me. It's, I've had this mindset forever of if you want X, you have to work for it. And I thank him for that because, we can spend and lose a lot of time kind of waiting for things to happen. So, so that was, he was definitely been a big influence. I rued, that influence a little bit when I was young because I wanted a car when I turned 16, and he's like, you got to work for it. And then one fateful Saturday morning when I was 13, he rustled me out of bed and said, all right, you're going to work with me. And I've been working ever since. So
that's great. So what did you do then? What was kind of like your first job, if that was the first one?
Yeah. So so my parents owned a furniture store back then. So I was working in the warehouse. So I helped deliver furniture, put furniture together, repair furniture. So I did that all through high school and during college when I would come home for the summer or come home for Christmas. So I did that for like 10 years almost until I got my first job kind of postgraduate. So yeah, and it was great. I mean, it was hot. During the summers like today, it's like 90 degrees outside. Working in a warehouse was not a lot of fun, and nor was it that fun when it was 10 degrees outside. But it shaped me. I wanted, that was the first thing I wanted. I wanted a car when I turned 16. I worked for a couple summers and during the school year, and I saved up the money and I bought it. And that was kind of like the first big life lesson for me that, it's like you have to work for it if you want it. And I really thank him for instilling that. I also want to just talk about my mom's influence as well, because it really different, I think, whereas my dad was more X's and O's. Here's what you need to do. My mom really instilled in me looking around at the world around me and paying close attention to who's around. Are they suffering or anything like that? My parents were both a product of the late 60s, early 70s, the flower generation. So, a lot of different ideas and all that. But my mom, I mean, she's always been kind of ahead of the times. So I remember when I was really little, we'd go to downtown Chicago in the late 70s and go to these anti-nuclear weapon protests and things like that. So that was, I remember that distinctly, even though I was only like 4 or 5 years old. I remember being downtown. She used to volunteer at a women's shelter of victims of domestic violence. So I remember going to these shelters, where it was like nobody knew that these women were there for their safety. And she would volunteer there and just kind of support them. She was into organic gardening 30 years before that was a cool thing to do. She was into recycling 30 years before that was a cool thing to do and all that. So she's always been like ahead of the times and really instilled in me this sense that, there's a world out there bigger than yourself. And, always kind of keeping an eye on what is going on around you, who needs help, who's suffering, things like that, has always, I'd say that married very well with kind of the X's and O's that my dad instilled in me.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess we're there, with your dad, you were kind of learning work. Your mom, was it kind of, do you feel like from both of them, it was really just kind of watching them, kind of how they think, how they work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was very much that. I mean, I think anyone who's kind of from Generation Gen X, we always have this sense that we were kind of left alone when we were kids. And I would definitely say I was, I mean, they didn't just let me do whatever I want, but at the same time, it really was more watching them than anything. So, my dad worked 6 days a week. My mom was home, just taking care of things and all that. And then with my brother and sister, but, I would go out with my friends, 7, 8 years old. I'd be gone from like dawn to dusk. And, there were no cell phones. There was no worried about, oh, where's Rob? What's happening to him? And, we'd be running around in the woods and I'd come home with like a bloody shirt or something like that. And it's like, what have you been doing all day? But yeah, it was just kind of watching them. I mean, they're always there. My mom has always been really good about, talking through various problems that I might have been going through and all that. And, so that always helped, but, it was really just kind of, just watching what they were doing and emulating them and kind of growing up in that.
No, I think that's really cool just to hear too. And also, I think for parents, just to hear that their kids were watching, do pay attention, do listen. And sometimes you wait until your kids are adults to, hear that or realize that. When we're kids, sometimes we know it all and I know, and, but the older you get, you realize, wait, mom and dad did know what they were talking about. And you learn that
Hmm.
and you start to get to share that back with them. So, I think that's cool. Hopefully, yeah, this will be fun for them to listen to as well.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, that's great. Nice. Any other people or experiences, things that have kind of shaped you, big picture, before we dive into?
Yeah, I mean, once I graduated college, I started working with a firm that was run by a guy who, was a pretty astute value investor, Rob Lyon. He had a very, very good reputation. He was a great guy to work for. And so I got really lucky. I had no idea what I was doing when I was 22, 23, moving down to Chicago looking for a job. And I just so happened to get into this firm that run by this guy, and just a great professional investment team and client service team, the whole bit. So a lot of people there. I mean, Rob Lyon, my old boss, Tom Wenzel, and several others, I think really kind of shaped my day-to-day work ethic in terms of, okay, if this is the business you're in, here's what you need to be doing and what you need to be thinking about. So, yeah, so I mean, there were a lot of people at work because, I mean, frankly, that's been my life since I graduated college is, working, and, family obviously as well. But, I didn't really have that until, 10 years into my career. So, yeah, so it's been, there's a lot there.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you were a person who knew pretty early on, this is what I want to do. This is where my interests are. So when you're 18, you already know that. Walk us through kind of how you knew that and
Mhm.
then what it looked like from there to get into it.
Yes, yes. So I will fully admit I was a nerd when I was a kid. I didn't get beat up or anything like that. So I at least had a personality, but I was a nerd. So I had two main interests and still do to this day. When I was growing up, one, I loved meteorology. So I would wake up. There was a program. We lived by O'Hare Airport or in the vicinity when I was growing up, and there was this TV show on PBS called AM Weather that would come on at 6:15 in the morning and give the pilots the forecast and everything. And as a 5, 6, 7 year old, I was waking up at that time to watch that every single day. I have no idea why it fascinated me, but just the weather has always fascinated me. So, I'm still into it. I have a weather station and, I've done storm spotting, stuff like that. So it's that always stuck with me. But then I also grew up during the era of kind of the classic 80s sitcoms, the comedies on TV that you watch on like NBC on Thursday nights or whatever. And Family Ties was always one of my favorite shows. And that was about a family, and there was this character played by Michael J. Fox called Alex P. Keaton, and he was a big, like, Reagan Republican and really interested in the stock market, always talking about stocks and the market and everything. And, at that point in my life, I'm 12, 13, and I was just fascinated by it. So, being the nerd I am, again on PBS, believe it or not, kids actually used to watch this stuff. But there was another show on PBS called Nightly Business Report that would come on at 5:30. So I'm dead serious. I would come home from school, middle school or high school or whatever, come home 4:30, kind of wash up a little bit. Nightly Business Report would come on at like 5 or 5:30, I forget. And I would watch it. And, day after day, here's what the stock market did. Here's what individual stocks had done. And that just that was super fascinating to me. And so by the time I went to college, I had these two interests and really wanted to, I actually went to college to pursue meteorology.
Okay.
Believe it or not. So
Yeah.
finance was always a big interest, but meteorology was kind of my first love.
We're going to start getting weather reports from you. We're going to, maybe in our newsletter, we'll start putting the quarterly weather report.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally.
It's
I mean, like
great.
Tom Skilling, who just retired
Yeah.
recently
Yes.
from Channel 9, he was always the guy I wanted to be when I grew up and all that. But one other aspect of me that people should know is I probably in my younger years underachieved what my potential was. So meaning I kind of took the path of least resistance. So when I went to school, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get into atmospheric sciences to become this meteorologist. And right away, I realized I was going to have to take like 3 really hard semesters of calculus, 3 really hard semesters of physics, and a bunch of other stuff. And I'm meeting all these new friends in the dorms and we're having fun and sleeping until noon, stuff like that. And I quickly realized that if I wanted to pursue that career, I was going to have to sacrifice some social things. so, so then I was like, okay, well, what can I do? And I'm like, well, I love stock market. I love stocks. I'll just go into business. That just seemed a lot easier. So that was kind of my easy way out going to college.
But there's still math, so that's what's interesting. I think a lot of people think finance people, it's such like there's so much math, and there is,
Mhm.
but it's not always the like really complex. Some of the pieces are like some of these calculations, but it is different than science. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they are very similar, though. I mean, you kind of look at meteorology. I mean, you're making forecasts about the future. So you're taking observable inputs, you're building models, you're making predictions about the future. It's the same thing in finance as well, and investing. When I got into my early career and all that, or my 20-year career of being an investment analyst, I mean, that's all it was. It was looking at what's going on in the economy, look at what's going on with these companies, talking to managements, reading balance sheets, coming up with forecasts for their earnings. And, in both those endeavors, I mean, what you quickly learn is no matter how much you think you know, and no matter how good you think your model is, it is really hard to predict what's going to happen more than 6 to 12 months in advance. I mean, things always happen unexpectedly. And, it's just something you have to kind of learn to deal with when you're in this business because, again, I mean, the smartest people in the world have been doing this forever, and there's very, very, very few that get it right consistently. So, being able to kind of deal with, being right and not getting too ego inflated, things like that. And when things are not going well, not beating yourself up and, shaming yourself or anything like that, because it's very cyclical. I mean, life is cyclical, investing is cyclical, weather is cyclical, and you just have to kind of learn how to manage through that.
Mhm. Yeah, I know something we kind of ask ourselves a lot, and it's interesting. It kind of ties to. So I was thinking very similar to what you said. Kind of data seems to be like a data, reading it, analyzing it, and then making decisions with it. That's something it seems like kind of from early on that you were interested in, and just kind of that skill set of being able to take data, interpret it, and then think, well, what do I do with this?
Mhm.
And I think that's something that's really interesting is, you can do that and you can make a decision, but when something happens the next day or the next day that doesn't support what you thought was going to happen, your belief in those decisions that you made and, whether we call them predictions or whatever of where the economy will be, that's really important because it's how strongly do you believe what you've analyzed and thought of, because you have to stick with those or decide if you need to make changes. Talk a little bit about that. Is that something, it's interesting because you were kind of thinking that way from a young age, or you really enjoyed that.
Mhm.
And I think that's definitely a learned skill. Talk a little bit about that and if that's something you've ever thought about or noticed in yourself. It sounds like yes, but have you thought about that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the school of hard knocks, I would say, and this is where it's a skill set that I think you only develop with experience. So, I worked with really, really talented investors early in my career, but they can only teach you so much. They can teach you kind of the X's and O's, and here's how you read a company or talk to management, things like that. But the actual experience of investing and, having the successes and the failures and everything, mainly the failures, is what really gives you that experience. So, early on in my career, late 90s, 1997, 98, 99 was probably the golden age of investing because you didn't have to know anything. The internet was out, stocks were going up 20, 30% a year, like all stocks. And, you felt great. I'm putting, like $100 into this investment account at TD Ameritrade and buying stocks, and they're going up like crazy. And I'm like, man, I'm the smartest guy in the world. And, and then 2000 rolls around, it breaks the other way, stocks start falling, and it's like, well, it's cheap now, so I'm putting more money in, and then, they fell like 90%.
Yeah.
Everything I bought did at least.
Yeah.
And, it's like, okay, that was a hard lesson to learn. It's like what can go up can come down, and, nothing goes up forever. So, really learning that, and then going through the housing bubble and things like that, and just managing client funds at that time through that period as an analyst of banks, nonetheless. I mean, that was really, it's like you just learn a lot, so you try to prepare, you do your homework, but there will always be things that come up that are like unexpected, and you learn the lesson, and so now you're a little bit more prepared for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think some of those, it is interesting. You'll hear people say, I mean, even you just choose a stock like Apple, you pick any company that's big and its stock has done well for years and, through Steve Jobs' life and things like this. And you'll hear people, who are investing themselves, and they say, oh, it could never go down. But it's interesting how no company is too big to fail. And we've seen that in different, ways, but it is really important to just tell yourself and just to keep this balanced mindset of, with investing, with finances, that you have to look at the big picture all the time and never say never.
Yeah. And I mean, it's as I mentioned before, it is a confidence game. So, I mean, you have to be able to kind of manage the successes and failures without getting too emotionally out of balance. Otherwise, when you're emotionally out of balance, you start making really dumb decisions. So, it's when you're young, you're going to do that anyway, even when, your parents tell you not to do this or that, and you do it anyway, and you're like, oh yeah, they were right. I went through the exact same thing. I mean, there were a lot of things that the people I worked with when I first started working at this firm were like, be careful, be careful. This isn't like the way it is normally. And I did it anyway, and I felt like, oh, I was really smart, and then I quickly realized I wasn't. So
yeah. That's actually a good start to asking. So at different points in your career, different experiences or events that happen. So when you were young, was there one or two that you can remember that professionally that kind of shaped oh, I learned this?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, probably the biggest lesson, which is always a continual battle, I think, is timing really is everything in investing. So you can have a good thesis, but if your timing is wrong, then you're wrong. And that's kind of the way I look at it. So even as I was kind of a young investor in the late 90s, early 2000s, things did get to a point that stocks were going up so much, and I was working at a place that really did value investing. So it wasn't like the high growth Amazon, Yahoo, Cisco type investing. We didn't own those things because those were not value stocks. And, just kind of looking at that, and it got to a point where I was like, this is insane. These stocks cannot keep going up. So me, again, not knowing what I was doing, I start buying put options on the NASDAQ 100 and the late 1999, very early 2000. Stocks surged right into March of 2000. I lost all the money I had put into puts, and then it rolled over. So, my instinct of this can't go on was correct, but my timing of it was poor. And then going into the housing bubble of 2008, I was covering financials. And, so I had a pretty good view of what was happening with mortgage lending. And there was this one mortgage lender, which was the largest one at the time, Countrywide Financial, run by a complete sleazeball. And I remember meeting with him one time at a conference, and I'm like, this thing is toast. Like, they're just lending money to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that comes in. So I started buying put options on this thing. And, I'm like, this thing is going to blow. This thing is going to blow. And this is probably like 2005, 2006. And the stock just kept going up and up and up. And again, I got blown out of my put options. And then right as soon as I cried uncle and I'm like, all right, I'm done, then the crisis hit and that stock went to zero, basically. So, it is, those are probably the two things that really influence, or that I think about a lot, is just, we're in the business of kind of looking at things and trying to predict where things are going, and structuring a portfolio in anticipation of that. And sometimes you get it right and sometimes you get it wrong, but it really does enforce the belief that timing is really important when you come up with something.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Do you think that timing can have more or less of an impact depending on what you're buying? So you were buying, put options. If we're talking about kind of like more, would you say that's kind of more something more speculative type of investing, versus if I'm just investing in the market, I own it for the long term, then timing isn't as important, except you might notice that you just started investing at the height of the market and then it goes down before it goes back up for you. Describe a little bit of that difference and, kind of how timing would impact those two things differently.
Yeah. Well, I think the way I invested back then, and I think a lot of people invest even today, is you buy and sell things. Well, you buy things, call it, and you're expecting that to go up and go up immediately. And, and that is perfectly fine. I buy and sell stocks all the time. So, I mean, this is what I do and enjoy. But the one thing I've realized, and particularly as I've kind of gotten into this business in terms of a financial advisor, is there is this concept of time horizon. And it's like, well, what is your actual goal here? So if I'm buying and selling stocks, like, what am I trying to achieve? What we're all trying to achieve is to make money, outperform the market. I mean, those are kind of the assumed things. And certainly, I mean, that is the case. I mean, that's the only reason you do it, is to make money and kind of beat the market. But if you're doing all that without really thinking about, like, what is the long-term impact of all this and where is this going to take me in 10, 20, 30 years, then it can really become an exercise in futility, because you're driven by short-term moves and emotions and greed and fear. And it can really, if you're too focused on what is happening today with your trading, you can really lose sight of what the big picture is. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I've learned, especially in the last, call it 7 to 8 years, since I became a financial advisor, is you really do have to kind of look at that. And you have to make a determination. It's like, yes, we want to make as much money as possible. We want to beat the market, but at the same time, we want to make sure that these long-term goals are being funded and that we're not doing something stupid. I mean, to put it bluntly, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. If it works, great. You're a millionaire and all that. But if it doesn't work, you're not retiring, or you're not able to spend like you were hoping. It's really kind of just looking at, yes, there is the kind of the short-term investing that we're doing, but it's always, at least now, I mean, I always kind of look at that in the context of what the long-term picture is and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. When we're older, we kind of realize I need to invest. When we're younger, we are willing to take risks. We have time to take risks. So I think that's natural that people kind of make, these are lessons you were learning when you were younger. Then when we're older, and now that you're managing money for clients, you're saying, well, we want the money to be there when they need it, which is what you just described. What is this for? And that really helps us to know what we should be buying for them. So that was kind of like earlier in your career. I guess now you fast forward, you've learned some lessons, some of these maybe speculative things, but you also probably learned how they work. I mean, lessons learned, yes, but now you know like kind of the risks with them. So I guess fast forward a little bit kind of to the middle of your career after some experience. What were, one or two, even, good or again, lessons that you learned? What were some experiences there?
Yeah, so after, call it 16 years, 17 years that I was at this company, things were looking great, kind of top of my career, very good spot and all that. And our company was doing great. We had actually just moved offices from like one tower to another in Chicago. So it was at that point, it was sky's the limit. Everything's going to keep going. And I'm just going to do this until I'm, call it 60 and I'll retire and everything will be great. And we have plenty of money set aside for that. So that was kind of like very late. And then all of a sudden, very late. So 2016, we started to kind of see internally some changes. We were owned by a bigger company out of New York at the time. And even though we had just spent an ungodly amount of money to move offices, it was starting to become apparent in the middle of like 2016 that there's something going on here. We don't know if they're planning layoffs or what is going on. So it was just a very, very abrupt kind of, holy cow, there's something going on here. And maybe there isn't this 20-year, just blissful path of just doing what I'm doing today. And sure enough, by the end of that year, we were told that the entire firm was going to be shut down and all the assets and everything were going to be absorbed by the parent company. So, within the span of 12 months, I went from riding high, sky's the limit, future, taking my family to 5-star resorts in Cancun and all that, to being out of the job, which was a complete and utter shock. And, thankfully, a couple of years before that, my wife and I went through a program, Dave Ramsey. I'm sure people have heard about Dave Ramsey before, and Financial Peace University. I was actually personally terrible with my money right into my mid-30s. Not very astute or anything other than the investing part of it. But we went through that, learned a lot about staying out of debt, building up emergency savings, things like that, like really preparing for downside scenarios, so to speak. And so by the time this happened at the end of 2016, thankfully, we had done that. We had put away a lot of money just for a rainy day, and we were prepared for that. So, but that was just a completely different mindset from my early career, where it was just kind of, you do what you do, not worrying about it too much.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so you lost, the firm closes, and then what were your thoughts then? Were you kind of like, I'm going to find something else, try to find something else in what I'm doing? Do I enjoy this enough, or do I want to kind of switch to something else?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's the what do I want and what does the family need? Those were the two things that I was really grappling with. So at that point in my career, I love investing, but that particular job was very stressful. I was traveling a lot, going to Europe and Asia and all over the place, and just a lot of responsibility and pressure to perform. That's not a bad thing, but when your annual income depends on, how much did you beat or not beat your benchmark, it does get pretty stressful after a while. So, I had, even before the firm closed, I had started to think, is there something else I could be doing here? And, we served like pension fund clients. So I was doing what I loved to do, but I never really saw the connection with how that was impacting the person who was depending on these investments. So I had already, before the firm had even closed or was even thinking about closing, I had already started to think about, well, I wonder if I could become like a financial planner, something like that, where I'm still in the business, I'm investing, but it's just a different flavor and experience of it. So that was what I was thinking. But then when this thing happened, I'm looking at my wife, I'm looking at my 4 kids at home, and a mortgage and the whole bit. And I'm like, okay, well, I can't just start from scratch and, not do anything. I got to look for something else. But the industry just the stock analyst industry has changed a lot in the last 10 years. There's a lot of reasons for it, but, kind of the classic Warren Buffett, Graham and Dodd value investing. I mean, that has just become extremely difficult to do over the last 10 to 15 years. And, so I'm a value investor. So I'm like, well, where am I going to go? If this is kind of a dying way of investing, there wasn't a lot of demand in the area, in the Chicagoland area, for that kind of thing. So if I wanted to stay there, we'd have to move to New York or somewhere else. So then it's like, well, we don't want to do that. So let me look at this financial planning thing. And, I would say very, very quickly, I was just like, you know what, let's just do it. I don't know what I'm doing. I start studying for my certified financial planner curriculum and all that, and got that in a year, but started my own firm. And I thought it would just kind of like blow up, like a lot of small business entrepreneurs. It's open the doors and people will show up. And it did not work out that way. But but that was kind of the big transition, was getting out of that old career and getting into a new one.
Okay, so when you were thinking about getting into financial planning and you said you looked into it, did you talk to people? Did you look at the courses? What did you do to kind of see if that was something you thought you would like?
Yeah, so I had a couple of acquaintances who were financial advisors. So I would talk to them every now and then, sparingly before I lost my job, a lot more aggressively after I did, just to kind of see what it was like and, what are the roles and responsibilities. And I think the biggest thing for me at that point in my career was, as I mentioned before, I was kind of analyzing stocks and doing all this work, but I had zero connection with the end client. I mean, I would see like the big consultant and talk to them about what we're doing, but there were real people like mom and pop and workers and union retirees that were depending on these investments to pay their benefits. And I had no connection to that at all. So probably the biggest thing that attracted me to make that career move was this idea and belief that, you know what, I'm going to be able to actually help people directly, sit in front of them, plan this stuff out, and help them achieve what they're trying to achieve. And, again, going back to kind of my childhood of, my mom's influence on me in terms of looking around and helping people, that's really where that came from, is just this desire to be like, you know what, I don't want to just work for myself. I want to work, for the benefit of my family, of course, but I also want to work for the benefit of others. And I just felt like at that point, I had the experience to do that on a credible basis. And so that was kind of the impetus.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really cool. And for people to know, when you're kind of doing the education piece of this, to do all of that and get the test, done, all of that in a year or shortly after, like that's pretty quick. So, some people kind of take a couple years and then sit for the exam. So, I mean, kudos to you for knowing. I'm sure you were kind of like, well, if I'm doing this, I need to do it. Time was probably kind of the essence, but that's great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at my wife and 4 kids at home, and it's like, I didn't have the luxury of diddling around. So it's like, if I'm going to stay in the path I was, find something immediately if it fits. And if it doesn't, I'm going in this direction, and you just got to hit the ground running, because, I can't just take a year off to collect my thoughts when, we got kids that want to go to college and pay bills and things.
Yeah, yeah. So to kind of tie this back to when you were younger, your dad, like your parents, they had their own business. Did you ever think that you would be a business owner? Did you ever see yourself starting or owning your own business?
Yeah, a little bit. I've always had a small business owner mindset. Own your own thing, be your own boss. So that was always with me. When I was an employee, I didn't really feel that too much, because the company I worked for was great. The people I worked for was great. So I didn't really feel the need to do that. But that even that company after it got bought out by this other larger firm, kind of like 2000, I forget what year it was, 2010 maybe. Uh, Before that, it was very, very, we didn't even have an HR department. Like if I wanted to talk to anybody, I just talked to them. But after we got bought out, like all this corporate America crap of HR departments and all this other compliance stuff. I love compliance, but I'm just, there's just like anyone who works in corporate America knows exactly what I'm talking about. And like, I just hated that. I just thought it was terrible. It was just like throwing sand in the gears of something that was working really well. And so that was actually one of the big reasons why I wanted to kind of move out on my own. I just did not, I had an opportunity to go join another firm here in the Chicagoland area, but I knew it was a different culture and there was a lot of corporate stuff to it. And I'm like, you know what? I just cannot do that anymore. And, not arrogantly like, oh, I want to be my own boss, but more of, I don't want to have somebody tell me when I can take vacation, or I don't want to have somebody tell me when I can go watch my girl play volleyball, things like that. So
there's a big difference between, even having an idea. So if you're an employee at a large company and you have an idea for something, you have to, it has to go up through the ranks to see, can we do this? There's a lot into it. If you have your own business or it's a small business that you're a part of, the four of us can talk about it and say, yes, let's do it. It's very different when you see something valuable that can be added, that it's worth doing. I mean, I think there's a really big piece to that when you can make a difference and you want to, and having the ability to do it. So yeah, the size of the company makes a huge difference.
although I would say, I quickly learned after that, and I'm like, well, I'm going to start my own business from scratch just by myself. Entrepreneurship has its own set of challenges, and I'm not going to lie, that was probably it was way harder than what I had expected.
Yeah. Yeah. Just really kind of starting. So I guess, yeah, walk us through. That's probably kind of the most recent part of your career. These probably last 7 years. Kind of talk us through that, kind of the things you've learned during that, things that have, kind of made you, I guess, the experiences and things.
Yeah. Yeah. So like 2016 firm closes, 2017 I decided I'm going to become a financial advisor, and I launched my own firm in 2018. And I just had this idea that, I didn't know anything about running a business or opening a business or marketing or anything. I was like, hey, I've been in the business 20 years. I'm going to open this thing. Clients are just going to walk in the door, hand me money to invest, and I'm going to do all this financial planning for them. And I'll just get back to right where I was before in terms of income and things like that. But I realized very quickly, it just just because you open your doors doesn't mean people are going to walk through. And so, I spent a lot of 2018, after some very quiet months at the beginning, working on marketing and really learning how to communicate, write blog posts, things like that. Because it's like, well, I have to actually make an effort to get out there and show people. So did a lot of that, but I'll be honest. I mean, it was not entrepreneurship, and being kind of on my own was not what I was hoping it would be. And where everything rests on your shoulders, success or failure, and P.S., I still had a wife and 4 kids at home that need to be fed and cared for and things like that. So that was not what I was hoping it would be. And only by the grace of God did I happen to, I kind of knew Trevor a little bit through some stuff, and I had met you and Steve, I think, at a conference, and it just, lo and behold, we were all like 10 minutes away from each other and all that. And so it was when you had actually approached Trevor and me about, hey, maybe we should all be doing this together instead of each of us in our 3 separate firms. I mean, I didn't like that idea at all. I was like, I just started this thing a year and a half ago, and now you're telling me to give it up. And so I had to kind of work through that a little bit, just in terms of, I didn't start this thing to just end it right away, but it just made so much sense to join forces and be like, you know what? It just so happened each of us has our own strengths in different areas. You're really good at marketing, investing is my thing. Steve does tax, and Trevor's really good with planning and kind of operations. So, it just made a lot of sense, but I needed that. Like, again, only by the grace of God in terms of the timing and the moment, because a year and a half being on my own, not seeing a lot of results. I mean, that was a really dark period, I would say, for me, just emotionally, spiritually, and everything. Because, it's one thing to lose your job. It's another to try doing something new and it's not working. So, that was hard, but, we're here and we merged 5 years ago, and it's been just a massive blessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been 5 years, which is so exciting. I mean, I think it's gone by so fast when we all, when we even just sit and talk about it and realize that. Yeah, it's gone by so fast. But I think that had to be hard. It's not just you realizing, okay, how do I get clients in? So first, like, you're already telling yourself, oh, this isn't working, but also then to realize and have to tell your family and see that impacts them. I'm sure that was kind of like twofold, like really hard to realize and to even just think about, okay, so what do I do now? And so I'm sure like I think even too, when we were asking like, hey, do you want to join us? I think that was one of the things I was worried about was, well, are these two going to want to give up their firm names, what they've built? Because it's personal when you're building this stuff. And so I wasn't sure, if you guys would even want to, because I know all of that work that goes into it. And so even those things had to be hard to decide.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you first approached us, I had lunch with Trevor and we both decided it was a terrible idea. Neither one of us wanted to give up our firms, but 6 months later, it was like, and not a lot of progress, I would say, at least on my end. I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't such a bad idea after all. But to your point too, I mean, I think, that kind of transition, telling my wife, hey, hang on for a year or two while I build this thing, and we'll kind of get back and we'll be going on these vacations and things like that again. I mean, when it was becoming pretty clear that wasn't going to happen, it's, that's where you as a man, you have to say, I got to set aside my ego here. I mean, I'm a husband number one, father number two, and it's like there's are people in my care. And so whether I want to merge or, combine with you guys, that really was a lesser question at that point, because it's like, I have to do something. I can't just go the next 5 or 10 years plugging along, building this thing, living off of savings, because that's just not going to work. So, but yeah, I mean, it's that transition in realizing that it was more than about me. It was about what was going on with my family and, how are we going to send our kids to college, things like that really impacted the decision to merge with you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the exciting things that we quickly learned, like once we kind of started talking about it and kind of like, why would we, and just realizing we all had skills in different places and how, a lot of advisors who do build their own firm, it can be very lonely. They don't have people to talk to. They don't have someone to bounce ideas off of. That's one of the benefits that we usually tell clients, is you're getting 4 different people looking at your information, versus just one person. And so that's one of the things I think that we all realize is we kind of have this built-in community. We have this built-in, team that really is a team. So as we're doing great work and growing, it's because of all of us. And so I know I'm so appreciative and so thankful for everyone and the strengths that everybody has. And it's just so cool when we see it so clearly. So, so now that you're doing this and you're kind of seeing, how you work with the end client, the person who's actually benefiting from, the investment recommendations and even the financial planning strategies we use, what are some of the things that you enjoy? Like, what are some of your favorite times, when you're working with clients?
Yeah. my favorite thing by far is I'm a numbers person, and I always say numbers don't lie. And I just, as I've been doing this job the last several years, I have realized how many people really, and I don't mean this in a bad way, they don't really know how they're doing. So even if they're making a lot of money or doing really well, I have gotten the sense from a number of people that we've worked with that there is just this nagging worry or uncertainty about how are we doing? Like, how is this all going to work out over the next 20 years? How are we going to be able to retire? How are we going to pay the bills? Things like that. So, and this is what I love to do. I mean, I love problem solving. I love doing the math and figuring out, okay, well, if this is what, if you want to take $20,000 a year vacations for the next 30 years, it's like we can do the math around what you need to do that. And that to me has been so rewarding. And I can honestly say this, as rewarding as my prior career was in terms of investing and traveling and, meeting CEOs and things like that, this has been like a million times better because I get to sit in front of people, like real people, couples and widows and people who just, they're just looking for guidance, and being able to, by the grace of God, have the skill set to be able to have the knowledge of these things, but also be really, really attentive in communicating it in a way that people can know that they're doing okay. Or maybe if they're not doing okay, that they can know that, and you can respectfully tell them, hey, you want to do this, but the way you're kind of doing things right now isn't working. So that to me is by far the most gratifying thing. And, particularly as we've been together for 5 years now, working with certain clients that we've had during that whole time, or we've worked with for 3 or 4 years now, and you're kind of doing these updates with them and talking to them regularly. It is so much fun to see progress being made, that the things we talked about that they wanted to do, and here's what we're recommending for you to be able to do that. Like, they're actually doing that, and it is succeeding, and they're able to travel and send their kids to college. Like, all that is just enormously gratifying. I can't even describe it. So, and that I just circle back, like when you were asking me, or we're talking about doing this and talking about life experiences, that is exactly, I get to marry kind of the best qualities of my mom in terms of really being empathetic and compassionate. And I'm not saying that, egotistically or anything. I'm not puffing myself up. I'm just, just my heart is that people are helped, that they're doing better. And then with my dad, the work ethic and, let's get in there, let's do the numbers, let's do the work to actually, see this through. I think that's really what makes what we're doing today, what I'm doing today, so gratifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's really great when you can take your strengths and in different areas. And that's what's great, I think, about financial planning is it's kind of the numbers, that technical part, but also marrying it with kind of people and emotions. And okay, I know what the numbers say, but is that what I want to follow? And so I think it's really cool, as you shared, you're really kind of taking what you learned early on as a kid, some of the things that you saw, and you're doing those, you kind of put them together. So I think it's really cool. I think too, one of the things, like, even in, saying, hey, can we talk about, kind of what matters to you and why you do what you do. Sometimes like we don't stop and think about these things, and we don't, kind of really think, how did I get where I am today? If I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And I think it's really cool to hear the story, and hear this stuff. So hopefully, even just hearing yourself talk about it, and, even if you go back and listen, but also just thinking through it. I think sometimes we don't think about it unless we have to. So hopefully, it's kind of just a good reflection, and, for you to kind of realize what's happened in your life, that journey, and where you're at. And you have so many skills and abilities. Like, it's so fun when clients say like they're reading what you write and things like that. I know, like, I think it's so valuable, but when other people are kind of, confirming that for you, so just these skills and things, I think that is really gratifying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I would say another big motivation, just kind of my last thought on that is having worked in the industry as long as I have, I'll be honest, I mean, there's a lot of bad people in the financial space, and I've seen just an unholy amount of shady stuff that companies have done, management teams have done, advisors have done. And I think, not just us, but a lot of firms like us are trying to get real about what is our industry about and what are the ethics of it. And, that's kind of like one of the unhinged or, kind of silent motivators for me is let's make financial advisor not a bad word anymore. And because it is, and it rightfully is, because there's a lot of scumbags out there. And, it's just, I just think there's so much work to be done, and when I look at other professions out there like journalism or whatnot, the thing that always strikes me is there's not like this internal core of people that are like, you know what, this just, the way we're doing things as an industry is not right. And it's hard for people to see that in the financial advisor space, but it is happening. And I like to think we're a part of that, where it's like, let's do some real work for people. Let's do some planning for them. Let's, not just stick them in expensive mutual funds so that we earn fat commissions, things like that. So it's that I would say is probably the last big motivator that I have for doing what I'm doing today.
Yeah. And I think something I thought of when you were saying that is I think being with a team of people is we're always kind of like holding each other accountable. Sometimes we'll be like, oh, I think this, but I know that's not the reason, that we would recommend this or that. And we talk those things out. Whereas if you're kind of by yourself, it's, you're kind of having those discussions in your own head, but, you don't have that accountability. So I actually think that's really one benefit, too, of each of us in growing personally and who we are and, how we give advice. So I think that's, a really great point. That's great.
Yep. Yeah.
I guess anything else, Rob, that you want to share that, you can think of? This has been really valuable. I know people are going to enjoy hearing this. And they're like, now I know why he gives the advice that he does. I think it's going to be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is this is self-promoting and all that, or as a firm, but I mean, we really do care. I mean, people need to understand that the four of us, me, you, Steve, and Trevor, I mean, we really do care. And, we, for whatever reason, and I still don't understand why, but for whatever reason, we have gotten a lot of clients in recent years who have lost loved ones and, are struggling, and it happened all of a sudden. And, it's seeing people go through that time and time again really, I think reinforces in my mind that there's a lot more to life than just, let's just invest and pile up this money and die with it. It's like, no, you can't do that. I think there's been a big shift in the last, call it 20 years. And to give credit where credit is due, I think kind of the millennial generation has been a big, I guess, big advocate of work-life balance, experiences. Kind of us older generations, it was all about work, and then retire and then die. And, I think we really do want to help people enjoy life today. You don't have to wait until you're retired to start taking trips or doing what you want to do in life. And, so I think that's just kind of the thing is we just really, really do care. And, I could quit now and my wife and I would be fine and we don't have to do this, but, it's like life is too short. There's a lot of work to be done and a lot of people to be helped. And I'm just glad to be a part of it.
Yeah. And I know you're a person who gets involved. So whether it's with going to school board meeting or community, whatever that is, church, other organizations being on boards, I know that you are a person who gets involved and does care and wants to hear. And, if there's something that needs to be said, you're not afraid to say those things respectfully. So so I can see all of that in you. So I think it's really cool. I know clients benefit from all of the experience and knowledge that together, has shaped how you work and how you help them. So yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Rob. This has been really great.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. All right. Well, we appreciate you listening to this episode. Remember, if you want a copy of that book, email podcast@financialdesignstudio.com to request one. One of the strengths of our team is how unique each of our stories are. If you want a team to come alongside you and take care of each facet of your finances, reach out. We would love to see how we can bring confidence to your finances so you can live more and give more. You can schedule a meeting on our website, financialdesignstudio.com, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening. To find any links or resources related to this episode, check out our show notes. Your host was Michelle Smollenberger, a certified financial planner and CEO. The guests featured are from Financial Design Studio, a team of experienced, fiduciary, fee-only advisors based in Chicago. Anna Lewis is the executive producer of the Behind the Designs podcast. And as always, for more information about Financial Design Studio and who we are, check out our website, financialdesignstudio.com. And final note, no content discussed on this podcast should be taken as financial advice. Financial Design Studio accepts no responsibility for your individual choices. We'll see you in the next episode.